send everyone a copy of the recording that's registered as well, so you can rewatch all of these golden nuggets that I'm sure we're going to be gleaning tonight as we go through. So what I think we'll do is, Ilse's going to go through some of the strategies and things, that we've talked about basically in our little interview that we did as well, the chat session we had that we posted. And I'd like to invite you all as we go through just to put comments in the box, any questions that you have, and we can basically answer the questions. Or I can ask Ilse the questions as we go through the session, so it can become a bit more of a Q&A session as well, so we can enlighten everyone as we go. How does that sound to everyone?
Perfect.
Yeah, you can hear me okay? The audio is good. Just a thumbs up if you can hear. Yeah. Yeah, great. All right. So let's get into it then. I think that's what we'll do. I'll just bring the chat box up so I can keep an eye on any questions as well that come through. So Ilse, welcome. I think majority of you know Ilse. I'm not going to do a huge introduction. I think I just wanted to let you know that she's very well known within our community, and also within her own right as a highly accomplished management consultant and leader in this coaching space. She's also, developed a lot of products and programs, for herself and for her clients, and works well in this leadership space, with really in the executive management, I believe is the case. Yeah, so I'm really pleased that we have her on board with us today, and I'm sure that we'll be able to get a lot of insights. One thing I'm really excited about is to delve more into the latest research that she's going to give us a little overview on in relation to the complexity theory and its rebalancing nature, which I think is going to help a lot of us with a bit more understanding in relation to that, is to these tumultuous times that we're finding ourselves in at the moment. So I don't know where you want to start with that, Ilse. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, look, I'll start. I think it's always a good idea for us to kind of look at, well, where are we currently at right now, and why is this such an important conversation to have? And so first and foremost, thank you for allowing me to come. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here and being able to share some of my insights around what is going on with businesses these days, but more so not necessarily about what the experience is that business owners are having, because it's very unique based upon the industry that the business is in, based upon the type of unique challenges that each business is experiencing. So it would be relatively arrogant of me to try and presume what is occurring for each and every business, but there are some common themes. So what I'd love to do is just to encourage everyone. I can see some more people coming on now, a lot of familiar faces, some brand new faces, so hello to everyone. There is the chat box there, so do we know that we can use the chat box if you guys do want to ask any questions as we're going along? I think Fiona is managing that, going to manage it beautifully for us and feed through any questions that come through. Is that correct, Fiona?
Yes, that's right. So any questions as you go, as Ilse is going through content, please just drop them in the box, and I'll sort of navigate those questions, and we'll get through as many as we can during the session. And if there's anything that we haven't answered, then we can certainly, I'm sure, answer the questions in the ICG group and things as we move forward afterwards as well. Yeah.
Beautiful. So this session is called the Balancing Act. And the reason why, when I was sitting down and just working out, well, what do I think would be a really great value to everyone? And I'm hearing a lot of people make comments such as, everything's just been thrown out of kilter, or I'm not really too sure what to do, Ilse, or, things are just completely out of balance. It was working perfectly before, and now this has happened. And one of the things that I specialize in, the area of the phenomenon of interest that I am just incredibly passionate about, and I spend my time researching and digging into, is this idea of adaptivity. So the story goes that when things are stable, when things are consistent, we don't really need to display leadership. It's in times when there are complexities, when we have challenges, when there are significant changes that occurs, whether it be crisis moments, whether it be a massive cultural shift, whether it be, activism issues. It's when there is a significant change in the industry, which is when leadership is really required. And this is what is known as adaptivity or adaptive leadership. When we're not in those places and times, what we need to do is we simply need to manage. We're just dealing with technical issues that occur every day. We go to work, we go to our office, we manage the process, we manage the tasks, we manage the teams, we ensure that things just don't get out of kilter, because we're essentially trying to control the system as we continue every single day. So we don't need a lot of leadership with that. I'm sure you can understand this experience. But it's when things like this happen. It's when we have the world towers going down. It's when there is a civil war that we need leadership. It's when there is a mass disruption to an industry that requires leadership. And so from my perspectives and from my experiences in studying adaptive leadership, it always comes back to, well, how are you adapting to the changes that surround you? And I would go so far as to say that the rejection of being adaptive is actually a dysfunction that a lot of business owners are really wrestling with, if that makes sense. Because when we fight against being adaptive, whether it's in you're changing a system that you're using, or changing the direction that your business is going in, or whether it's fighting against being innovative with potentially a new software program you need to instigate, or whether it's assigning people new roles within your business. Whatever the strategies are that needs to occur in a business to ensure that your business is healthy, it's thriving, it's ecological, meaning it's making money, that you have a way forward for yourself, that there is a strategy, that your team is well looked after as you possibly can. If you're not embracing those shifts and changes, then that highlights to myself, what I'm doing highlights to me that there's a challenge with adaptivity. And as we were mentioning before, it's in these times of crisis and change and complexity that we need adaptivity. So how do we make sense of lockdown? How do we make sense of this in the business narrative? Well, one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to apply what's called sense making. Now, sense making it's a school of thought that comes from a theory of distributed leadership. So distributed leadership is tied into complexity, which is what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. It's all kind of tied in together. But there's this beautiful overarching banner called distributed leadership. And distributed leadership is really critical in times like this when we're looking at adaptivity, because it is highly contrast to typical frameworks, typical systems of leadership, which are usually, and this is a generalist assumption, a generalist frame. However, the typical traditional leadership model in businesses, whether it's a small business or a medium-sized business or a large corporation, is a highly autocratic leadership model where there is management that occurs from the top down. Now, businesses that are micro businesses, so one-person bands, nano businesses, freelancers, coaches, consultants, you're operating in a space where you don't necessarily have the benefits of what larger size businesses have, where you have multiple stakeholders that you can bounce ideas around with, where you can generate new innovative strategies, where you can brainstorm situations and new ideas to improve your business, which is why, how do we mitigate that? We mitigate that by creating community. That's why it's so important for solo businesses or people who are sole operators to have community, because it allows you to start moving into this framework of distribution. Distribution, as the word implies, meaning that an idea, an element, a particle becomes distributed in amongst this framework, as opposed to a highly autocratic leadership model where it's just you making all the decisions. It's highly dictatorial. It's very energy draining. So why does this all matter potentially for you? It's because when we look at distribution, the reason why it is such a powerful way of understanding a business is because of this aspect called sense making. Now, sense making, which you might be familiar with because many of you do human behavioral based training. For those of you who here who haven't done human behavioral based training, it's essentially this concept that says to us, we are all meaning making machines. Now, when we appreciate that we are all meaning making machines, what we need to also acknowledge is the potential for us to discount that we are meaning making machines. So what do I mean by that? I mean that even if we consciously know that we are meaning making machines, we often forget and we move into autopilot mode. We go through the motions. We react instead of responding, or we do the flight response and go into a state of shock rather than pausing to consider, to recognize, to understand. It's a highly reflective process when we start off sense-making crisis. It's tantamount to that moment of peace before you act. It's the contrast to, ready, aim, fire. Most people go fire and then aim ready, if that makes sense. So when we're looking at distribution, it has such great application because of these few things. One, it allows us to be adaptive. Two, it allows us to embrace the idea of innovation in a far greater capacity than what we would ever do if we think that we're in it on our own, because we're not. The third thing it does is it allows us to create a place of interdependency. So interdependency is where we start moving into complexity theory and the research around this. Because interdependency is something that we are not taught how to do. So if you look at the context in which we traditionally operate business in, the context being perhaps the movies we watch, it could be the TV programs we see, it could be the ads on social media or on TVC, so commercials. It's the books we read. It's the promotion of the propaganda around independent. Be independent. Go out and get what you want. Be that warrior. You don't need anyone else to do it. You can do it on your own. So for a lot of business owners, a lot of managers, a lot of leaders, which include C-suite leaders down to freelancers as well, there is this propensity for leaders to feel like they've got to do it alone, where they feel like because they've been conditioned to always hustle, which is what the mass market has always taught us that we've got to do. We've got to hustle to get results. And for some people, absolutely, yeah, you got to bring out more of the hustle, more of that warrior energy. But what it also has done is it's caused many leaders to adopt, as I mentioned earlier, a dysfunction around adaptivity. And we cannot adapt if we believe it to be true and hold this worldview that it needs to be done alone. It's one of the biggest lies that I personally believe and professionally believe that we have fed business owners. Because when you operate in a place of interdependency, this is where complexity theory starts to come in. Let me just check in first and foremost. How are we doing? Just let me find out from you all. You can, if you guys have all got your little type pad keys there and so forth, what are you currently, what's some of your key learnings that you've already highlighted from what I've shared with you so far? Because it's very difficult doing a straight seminar. I do not like doing straight seminars because I just feel like I'm talking. So I'd love to hear from you. What are you learning so far? Thanks, Denise. Yeah, that's awesome. So we got people saying, oh, you can all see each other's comments. So highlighting the idea around independency. It's challenging to do independency and create much. Cannot change the world by ourselves. Nice. Yeah, that's a great question.
Amanda's asking a question. Yeah, can you see that, Ilse? Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw that. So Amanda's asked, does the working alone attitude come from a belief of scarcity? I think my jury's out on that one. What I think it's more of is that it comes from why you've started working alone in the first place. So many people who are sole operators have become sole operators because they've probably left the corporate world and they've wanted to start a business that is more in alignment with their skills, their genius, their talents, a way to make a difference in the world. It's got meaning for them. So they move into this space of working alone because they enjoy the freedom of working alone. And that is perfect. It's beautiful. It's a good thing. Where the challenge comes in for people is when they forget that there's a developmental stage that we go through with any new entity we create, any new organization we create, no matter how big, no matter how small. We forget that dependency is the very first stage of any new life, whether it's human life, whether it's business life, whether it's the life of a seed. It doesn't matter. Everything starts off needing to be dependent on something else. So when you start your new business, you are there on your own per se, meaning you don't have a large team around you, but you're still highly dependent on resources because you're doing a lot of training and so forth. So many of you who are with the Institute, highly dependent on the Institute for insight, for training, for skills and so forth. But then you've got to move through to a place of independency. Independency is when you've got some game about what you're doing. You know the ropes. You know how to rock and roll. You know how to bring that. It's where the warrior energy comes in. But many business owners get stuck here. And when it comes to, when a crisis occurs, this doesn't necessarily mean, like COVID's just one example of it. And it's not really, like a lot of people are saying it's highly unprecedented. We've never been in this place before. Well, that's true to an extent only. We've never experienced a pandemic worldwide like we're experiencing now. But we most certainly have experienced mass world crises. There has been World War I, World War II. We've experienced crises like that has stopped the world. We've also experienced industrial revolutions that have gone through different stages, and has changed completely the way in which we do life, the way in which we purchase products, the way businesses operate. So we are not new to going through complexity. This is why having the ability to adapt is so critical for business owners. So, Amanda, I don't know if I answered your question completely. I'm happy to loop back to it if I need to, but I'm just conscious of making sure I don't get too off track, if that's cool. Thank you. I'm ready, says Frederick. That's really highlighted it for her. Hustling alone. So Sahani said, hustling alone may not get you the results. Yeah, look, it reminds me of that saying to, if we want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, we go together.
Very true.
And it's true. It's just not untrue. So where does the spanner in the works occur? That's what I'm interested in, those aspects. Where is the spanner? Where is the part that's off kilter? Or where is the system in this infrastructure that's perhaps broken, that's not communicating effectively, right? It's where, as we said, we get stuck there. And that's why I call rigidity or non-adaptivity, it's a dysfunction, because the reason why I say it's a dysfunction is when we know what we know about human behavior. What do we know about human behavior? For those of you who aren't in the school of thought that I'm speaking from, what we know about human behavior is one of the key success principles is that we need to bring behavioral flexibility. So in all situations, when you believe it to be true that you are stuck, what it means is you're operating from a place of lack of behavioral flexibility, because there is no way we can be stuck when you are experiencing behavioral flexibility. Now, what does that mean? It means you change something that you're doing. If you were feeling uncomfortable sitting in your chair, you will change the way you sit. That is an example, a micro example of behavioral flexibility. Adaptivity is asking you to now do this on a big level. Now, where does this start to play into this conversation around business and how do we understand through complexity? Because complexity, we can't understand complexity and we can't understand adaptivity without sense making. Now, if we take the metaphor of your chair, for you to know it's time to adjust, to shift in your chair, if you're not comfortable, you have to have your senses engaged. You will not adjust if you don't notice that there is a need to adjust. It could be the way you feel. It could be a muscle starting to cramp up. It could be your breathing starts to not be as fluent as what it was before because you might be sitting hunched or something like that. So we make sense of the situation. And it's one of the greatest challenges for business owners because we are so used to going fast. We are so conditioned to getting stuff done. We even create an identity around being busy all the time, if that makes sense. You know, you speak to many business owners I speak to, what are you up to? Oh, so busy doing, and then they proceed to tell me what they're doing. So we've created this identity around not having enough time to do things. We have created an identity around, for some might call it, a sense of significance around always being busy. And so what that causes us to do is to shut down our competency. And I'll explain why I say competency and not skill in a moment. But we shut down our competency and capability to see, to pause and consider, to observe, to bring reflection as well as reflection. Reflection is when we are bringing a greater depth of understanding about our resonance with something else. For example, how are you resonating, relating, understanding, making sense of this thing of social distancing, of COVID-19, of the results that is occurring in your business? We don't stop enough to consider that. Now, part of why this is just part of my obsession. I think it's partly is because I was raised in the business world by understanding leadership first, which is quite contrary to to how a lot of business owners are developed. I grew up in my career with having a very deep understanding and a lot of counsel and a lot of mentoring and a lot of education, which was from formal places, but also from people within my family and so forth, around leading. And leadership is very different to management. We all have an awareness of it, but we don't pause to consider it, because we got to manage the business. That's the message the market teaches us. You got to manage the business. You got to get it done. You got to hustle. You got to hustle. You got to hustle. Well, there's a time for that, and there's a time for reflection, right? But when we get hung up and we get addicted to just going through the motions super fast, we're missing opportunities. We're missing ways where we could innovate. We're missing strategies that we could be implementing. It's why I love, it's why the skill of coaching is absolutely imperative for anyone going into an organization. Because if you don't know how to slow down someone's thought processes, it's absolutely impossible to help a leader make sense of their world. So making sense of this is really a critical capability to have. Sense making involves reflecting, as I mentioned. It involves reflection. It also involves an aspect that most leaders don't want to consider. It involves them looking at what is your world view about business. Our world view could be highly pragmatic. It could be highly conservative. It could, you can grab it from any area. You could look at contextual frames such as capitalism. You could have a worldview of fundamental capitalism, or you could have a worldview of business being a highly social economy. Or you could look at other models and frameworks such as, what is your leadership model? So I resonate very strongly with, because I've seen the results and it's very much aligned with my values. I resonate very strongly with a distributed leadership model, because I think that there has to be interdependency. There's got to be contrast and polarity that occurs in an organization rather than a silo dictatorship. I just don't think that works. Or you can establish your worldviews, and this is something that's really critically important for people to do. You can establish your worldviews based upon, models like spiral dynamics, which are beautiful models that helps us understand, levels of thinking and the values we operate under. Some of these you might not be familiar with, but just jot it down, explore it. So when you start considering really what is leadership and how does leadership affect business, what we do is we appreciate that leadership and business aren't synonymous. They're actually two very different things. And leadership only arises in times of complexity, times of crisis, times of change, times that are going to have significant impact upon the organization, upon the people. It doesn't matter how big, it doesn't matter how small. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat and see if there's any questions or comments to have a look at. Fiona, is there anything I mentioned that you think I could dig a little bit into or go over again?
I think everything you mentioned has been very clear for me. Is it resonating with everyone here? Just maybe a thumbs up if you're following, and or is there anything that you'd like to dig into a little bit further? Yeah, I think everyone's got a thumbs up there. There's no specific questions.
Awesome.
Point. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. So, complexity theory is very much integrated with quantum physics. So, what I'm going to preface this with is it's a big topic. And there is no way at all I can do it justice in this hour. I think we've got an hour left or so forth. So what I want to do is this. I want to share the aspects with you that is going to be helpful. Yeah. The other thing I want to preface this with is that there's at least two varying definitions of quantum physics. So scientists don't even agree on what it is, which is a beautiful thing. I love that. I love that. But what's important here to know is that complexity theory is really essentially looking at these polarizing aspects that occurs in our daily life and is occurring right now in your business. So, for example, we have a health issue right now, a health crisis, which is one element, and it's now affecting your business. When you've got more than one aspect, we are now starting to look at the realms of what is complexity, meaning how is one particle affecting each other? Because quantum physics looks at atoms, it looks at particles, it looks at the relationship between them. Now, there are laws that are controlling, or the universal laws that control the way in which these atoms and particles work together. And all the time we're finding out more. Now, what is beautiful in quantum is this idea of self-organizing particles. Now, you can definitely do some research into this. Go and delve into it if you like, if it really tickles your fancy. But the thermodynamic laws is what comes into place when we're looking at complexity theory and distributed leadership. Now, if you remember, I was saying to you, we've got this interdependency that occurs. Now, in Western society, we are highly conditioned to ignore contrast. We don't typically like contrast. And we typically prefer, and I'm saying typically because I'm generalizing the heck out of this, because this isn't everyone, but society as a whole, in Western society, we prefer to be black or white. We prefer to be to have an identity of a reflector or being an action taker. We prefer to be more masculine or more feminine. We prefer to be a go-getter as opposed to being someone thoughtful. We prefer to put ourselves into these boxes. When we do this from a leadership perspective or even from a business management perspective, what we're doing is we're ignoring the beauty of polarity. Now, polarity being these two seemingly opposing forces. For example, right now in your business, there's a struggle that you're having with something. It could be you're struggling with trying to figure out how to make more income, more revenue. Or you could be struggling with how to keep up with all the business that's flowing into you right now. It's not the same for everyone. I have some clients whose businesses are literally booming right now. And I have some who's really struggling right now. So there's this challenge, it's this tug of war that occurs when we're operating in this space of change, of new significant issues that's arising. So when you start looking at causal, what is causing this to occur? We then start to acknowledge that there is more than one different elements that is creating this situation. But when we believe that one thing causes the other in this system that is your business, we stop ourselves from adapting, because with the laws of complexity theory, everything is mutually synonymous with each other. Now, what I mean by that is, if you believe that there's some major change that's occurred in the world right now that has caused your business to combust, implode, let's act as if it's a downside, right? And now I'm not talking about those major industries which this pandemic has completely wiped them off the game. I'm not talking about that extreme, okay? So please just don't say, oh yeah, but what about the hospitality industry? Yes, absolutely. What about Virgin? Well, Virgin might actually sit within this example, but I'm not talking about the hospitality industry. I'm not talking about those industries where it was virtually impossible. They just got wiped out immediately because of this. I'm talking about the businesses who really flew under the radar, who are still actually capable of operating but haven't been. Now, when we look at this idea of these opposing forces, but these opposing forces being mutually synonymous with each other, what businesses are actually not doing, which is where sense making comes into it, is they're not pausing to acknowledge, well, where were potentially the gaps in my business before this occurred? Where were there holes in my bucket before this happened? Where was I mismanaging my business, which caused my foundation to be rocky right now? Where was I overlooking or ignoring a really critical system or infrastructure or resource I should have had in place in my business, but I didn't, for whatever reason that might be? For some of you, it could be having an awareness of this mutual synonymous relationship we have with polarity. I'm really pleased I had that set up. I was just talking to one of my clients this afternoon, and he said to me, Ilse, I cannot believe we've had to buy. He said they've had to buy a new truck for their fleet. He's had to hire somebody else to be on, and he said, I'm looking at everybody else around me going, how is this even possible? And I said to him the same thing I'm sharing with you all tonight. It's that really, when you operate out of a place of wisdom, which is using this idea of sense making and taking care of those elements that are so critical to your business, and you're prepared, you will always ride the wave, because there's nothing, we can't predict anything. The only thing we can predict is the future that we are creating for ourselves. So there are a lot of businesses who are really kicking themselves right now. A lot of them, because they're recognizing that but for COVID-19 occurring, they would have continued on the same path they had been doing, and they would never have been the wiser as to the holes they had in their bucket. This might look like, as I mentioned, infrastructure, appropriate softwares. I think one of the biggest ones that we can probably all acknowledge is the need to be tech savvy. You know, we are literally on the precipice of quantum computing. A quantum financial system is coming down the pipeline. But yet, how many industries that should have been, and I say should very deliberately, they should have been already tech savvy, but they didn't. But they chose not to. And now they're really struggling because they realized they were behind the 8 ball from the get-go. Now, technology, things like Zoom, this has been around forever and a day. So what it's allowing us to do, this crisis, this complex situation is allowing us to recognize that for one, it's that we literally are part and parcel of an entire system, that our businesses do not operate in isolation, that our business is part of an interdependent network that doesn't just operate locally, statewide, or nationwide, but it operates globally. It's the butterfly effect, which is where the idea of complexity theory, quantum physics, the butterfly effect, thermodynamics, that's all operating together. It's the pot of water that boils over when there isn't a change, or we can call it an adjustment or an adaptation in the energy, meaning the heat, or cooling it down, or taking it off the stove, or adjusting in your seat because you recognize that you're getting a little bit uncomfortable. Why do we get those pins and needles? Oh, you're just leaning on something for too long, but you weren't sense making. You stopped sense making and you were just in the proverbial autopilot. Just having a quick look here. That's awesome. So I managed to set up, learn so much about my computer and its capabilities over the last 4 weeks. That's awesome. Yes, so Dave's just said so many businesses are realizing now that their workforce can be remote and the same productivity or even greater efficiency can take place. Yes. Now that's going to be a massive opportunity for some of the macro issues that we see within corporations. People who are disabled, where they've been discriminated against because of their disability and they couldn't take on jobs where they had to be in an office place. And workplaces and corporations have claimed that they could not have that job as a remote job, are now finding, oh, perhaps we could, because right now we have to. Issues around gender inequalities in the workplace. Again, for these issues where they've claimed that there could not be flexible working options for men and for women, are now starting to realize, oh, we actually can. And for those who are sense making, for those who have some form of ecological values place, which is often quite in contrast to fundamental capitalism, if they are sense making, they are going to start to recognize that there is a shift occurring in macro value systems within the world right now. Though there will be many who will go back to doing work they were doing before. But I hazard to say that right now, the irrefutable fact is that they are recognizing that work can be done, and for goodness sakes, probably should have been changed a very long time ago. Like, you know, if we look at Australia, we rank one of the lowest in the Western world on the Sustainable Development Goals in areas of responsible consumption, gender equality, and climate change. Why is that so? Well, there's many reasons, but essentially our world views controls the way in which we operate, from a macro corporate level to a meso institutional level, and then for business owners on a micro level, how we operate. What I believe that this is going to do for many people who are aware, who are sense making, because you cannot have adaptivity when we're not sense making, is going to cause them to start to be aware of aspects of an element of a system that they didn't acknowledge before, of infrastructure that they were forced to have to implement because of this pandemic that they never even really considered was possible, was plausible. And part of sense making is recognizing, one, our identity. And our identity is formed by our worldview, by our values, by the context in which we've been, our leadership and our business has been shaped. But it's also created by what's called plausibility and accuracy. And plausibility and accuracy is a very interesting thing, which will make the difference between those who will move out of this current situation we find ourselves in to a more ecological view of business, and those who will go back to trying to do business the same way it was before. It's going to be very challenging for major corporations to go back and do business the way it was before, because now those that were advocating for shifts and changes in those major issues such as inclusivity and diversity, they're going to go, well, hang on a second, you did it when we were in COVID-19, why not now? So there is going to be what's called proof in the pudding. That is irrefutable. They cannot deny this. And so what happens when we start to see the landscape from this perspective of, well, what is the beauty of complexity? Well, what it's showing us is that the network, the systems, the infrastructure is all connected to each other. We cannot see another business over there and believe that because they're different, because they are contrast, that we don't have an impact upon each other. Because when you've got two opposing forces, as I was saying earlier, Western world likes to see things very absolutist. We can't do that. If we continue to do it, then we'll continue to remain behind the 8 ball while everybody else is moving to a different level of ecological business operations. It's going to be virtually impossible for people to move back to another state. The reason why is because not just workers or employees, and I trust that this is an okay conversation to have because it gives us a macro perspective of the business landscape. Is this cool? Yeah. Just nod because I can see your heads. Awesome. So it's not just employees, but it's also consumers. Consumers are going to expect something different. And, you know, if you look at sites like, goodness me, I can't remember the names of them. However, this is what they are. They're essentially that was fun. They're consumer protection sites. So you've got sites like, I think it's Choice. You've got sites that essentially will, you know, people are giving feedback on businesses all the time. You've also got employee sites like, I think there's one called Glassdoor, where employees give feedback on the workplace. They can put their salary, they put their feedback about the culture of the place, what it's really like, so to speak. And there's all of these perspectives. So whether it's right or wrong isn't what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that there is far more transparency now in organizations, for organizations, but for the purpose of employees and the consumer. So it's going to be very difficult for people to operate their businesses in the old way, as opposed to what consumers are going to be expecting from you. So the question, which is going to be very critical for every single person listening to this and those who want to hear it, is what will your consumers expect from you next? Because if you are not providing them faster, more efficient, more strategic, more accessible, more affordable ways of interacting with your products, they won't come back. People are, you got to think about the way in which people are experiencing the world right now is very, very, very varied. Very varied. There's a lot of trauma in the world right now. You know, there are people who are having a really wonderful experience in social distancing, people who live in very functional, healthy, loving homes. And then there are others who live in highly dysfunctional, abusive homes where they cannot get away from their perpetrators. So domestic violence has gone through the roof. Sexual abuse has gone through the roof. Children cannot get away from their perpetrators because they're not at school. And so their perpetrators are highly stressed, even more so than what they usually are. They cannot get away from alcoholics. There's a lot of very different experiences people are having right now. So where do you fit in? Where you fit in is, as I mentioned before, it's this beautiful concept around sense making. Sense making you and your worldview first and foremost around your business. One of the next things you've got to do is what's called journey mapping. So journey mapping is a skill of innovation. Journey mapping comes from comes from distributed leadership, where we look at a design thinking process. And we look at what's inductive and what's deductive in our thinking process. So, for example, when the English came to Australia, they didn't realise that swans could be black. So when we see something, when we see a black swan and we've only ever thought a swan could be white, we now start to trigger a different type of thinking, a different neurology. And we had completely distorted the world into thinking that all swans were black. So right now, there can be a beautiful distortion that you can do in your business right now, which is, I thought my business needed to look like this. But now, because of this change, this beautiful place where we're sitting in right now, where you can constantly recreate, you can ask yourself, well, what am I noticing out there in the world? What other forms of business models am I seeing? My household, we have a couple of businesses, and we're about to launch another business next week. Why? It's because we sat back and we went, what's going on? And we just observed the marketplace. And we noticed that because there are some shifts in the way people are thinking about their health, about their relationships with people, and what many people are doing, which is highly reflective and taking care of themselves, highly aware of aspects and issues that they perhaps didn't know was going on around the world. And they're starting to really tap back into, this is not everyone, so I'm being completely generalist here, so everything I'm saying is a complete lie, but there's many people who are really starting to get more connected with their interaction with different complex nodes around us. Because again, one of the things that I'm noticing a lot with business owners and just people in general is they're starting to get curious about the world they live in. If not now, we recognize that we live in a global economy where something that happens over in China is going to affect every single region in the world. Then we're hiding under a rock. And the idea that things will go back to normal is never going to happen. Those who believe it's going to go back to normal are living in a complete delightful delusion of wanting things to be the same again for them. It just can't possibly, because this is the beautiful thing about complexity and crisis, is it completely changes our worldview. Completely changes our worldview. Even if we don't want to acknowledge that it has, it's still happening for every single person right now. And where the challenge comes in for business owners is making sense of who they believe they are in amongst the new information they have just learned about the world around them, and recognizing that how they are positioned in their world, whether it's a global world or it's your immediate experience of your world, it doesn't matter what level it is, but it's really causing people to question their identity in how they relate to business, to people, to things, to ideas, even to what they believed was absolutely true about what business should look like, what their business should look like. It's causing them to question it, and that's pretty scary for a lot of businesses. Really, really, really scary, particularly for micro. Well, I'll go, if I can do it chronologically. It's, nano businesses, micro businesses, small businesses. Those businesses are really challenging right now because they don't have that. They don't have those teams where they can be bouncing stuff around, which is why I keep saying, community is so incredibly important because it creates energy. Now, if I remember before, I was sharing with you all that there's a big difference between capabilities and competencies and skills. A skill is something we learn. So we can learn the skill of managing a business. It's a very tangible, very black and white. If I want to put a computer on, the skill I need to have is I need to know where the button is and I need to know how to press it. I just need very fine motor skills to be able to do that. If I want to run a business, if I want to set a business up, well, there's a checklist. I just do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. I have 3 children and they're helping to build this new business. And so I'm going to teach them business management. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. It's just steps. But leadership's a different conversation because it's not skills, it's capabilities. And here's the nuance. So I like seeing the nuances. Capabilities is generative. It comes out of seemingly nowhere. And because it's generative, because it's this new energy that comes up. For example, the capability of being adaptive. Man, how do you teach that? Well, actually, yeah, I do, because I've had to figure out how to teach it to people. But it's challenging because it's unseen. It's not tangible. Or the capability of discernment, or the capability of wisdom, or the capability of sense making, or the capability of how do I reflect, or how do I be reflexive, or how do I really insert here any other intangible value that really is essentially a capability. It's really tough. And that's what a lot of people don't love about the idea of leadership. So there's first stage responses, which is when you have crisis and complexities and so forth, where you've got to go into just do. That is just a given. But you can't live there. You got to reflect, and then you got to do, and then you got to go back and reflect again. And you've got to know where your skills currently are. And you got to take a very realistic assessment. You got to bring a lot of pragmatism to doing this. What is going on in your business right now that is telling you you need to adjust in your chair, that you need to adapt? Holes, find the systems that should have been in place that haven't been in place, and start to get them plugged up. That's the easier part. Maybe the simpler part is what I should say, not easy. So utilize the people around you to help notice what it is and to give you a deconstruction of what's going on in your business, because the management of the business part's the more simpler part. But then the adapting is, what are you adapting to? So there's people on here from various different industries. So it's there's not one size doesn't fit all, because adaptive leadership is not like that. It's not prescribing this is what you should do. It's not that. It's, if you have to have someone tell you what you need to do with your business, then you are allowing yourself to stay stuck in a worldview that is controlling, is highly dictatorial, and that is highly absolutist. That's where the dysfunction of a lot of leadership comes in, which is why there is a high level of businesses that start but don't maintain, a lot of businesses that just aren't successful. It's not because they didn't follow a system properly or so forth. For some people it is, if that makes sense. For some people it most certainly is. They're just not doing the system the way they should do. They're not following the checkpoints, just, it's paint by numbers. But moreover, it's the sense of adaptivity. It's when they come up against a challenge, and all COVID is a challenge. Just see it as a challenge, an opportunity that lies within a challenge. Well, you got to sense make it now. But you can't just sense make it from a localized point of view. You got to sense make it from an industry perspective. You got to start moving your context out. So it's what is happening in my locality. Get the information, inform yourself, have the facts you need to have. What is happening nationwide, worldwide in my industry. But that's the easy part. It's then about complexity, which is interdependent nodes that operate, that are going to have an impact on each other, right? And you got to ask, how do I fit or sit or relate to all of these aspects going on around me? And if you want to take it to another level, we start looking at the meso levels of operations, which includes what is happening in the institutions that is connected to my industry. What is happening with the schooling or my education that is connected to the industry? What are all the bodies, the stakeholders that are at play that is affecting my business? Because businesses don't think they don't think contextually enough. They think that their business is isolated. They think that they're on their own. When I see a lot of these hashtags in the marketplace, we're all in it together. We got some cool ones at the Coaching Institute around Stronger Together. I'm seeing it not from just me and you, we're together. So the person to person is stronger together. I'm not just seeing it from that level. I'm looking at the micro, the meso, and the macro levels of what really are we talking about that's stronger together. Well, there's people, there's one, absolutely. But what other stakeholders are we ignoring? That if they're not strong or their frameworks aren't strong, that's going to impact on my business and your business as well. I'm also thinking about ideas. What are the ideas that aren't strong? That if we hold on to those ideas, ideals, philosophies, propaganda, and other such frameworks that formulate the way in which we operate as a business owner. You can look at economic theory, absolutely do that. You can look at frameworks around, remote working and what controls what is determining the way in which we do remote working. There's so many beautiful aspects to this. And the more we start looking at, well, really what is impacting us, we start to get a richer texture of, well, business ain't just about business. Business is actually connected because of this beautiful thing called complexity, because of this beautiful beautiful theories around quantum. We just can't ignore it. So what are we not seeing that is contextually relevant to the experience you are having in your business right now? What are you being taught? What are you not being taught? Association bodies you're connected with. What are they telling you is important that you need to know about? And what are they not telling you is important that you need to know about? What is the political system informing us? You know, a lot of people are just saying to me now, I'm just not even watching the news anymore. Well, why are people not watching the news anymore? Well, because the news media is controlled largely by a handful of people globally. You know, if any of you follow, you know, the uproar about CNN over in the United States, that people are just tuning out now because the news is just so completely fake. So what are you noticing? What are you taking in? What are you allowing to condition yourself to give you the worldview that you have? It really is this beautiful quandary and this idea around, well, it's not just an isolated experience that we have in business, but we can only control what we do. However, we cannot ignore the fact that there are moving parts. COVID has really taught us that we are so far more connected than what we ever thought we were. And I think that this, for people who recognize that the only way we can predict the future is to create it ourselves, are those who are going to thrive. Because when you start gathering more information and more facts, you now you have the opportunity to become far more discerning than what you ever were. However, it also comes at a price. Because if you don't want to assimilate information from other aspects that is affecting your business, then you'll chunk right out. It'll fry your brain. So what I say to people is, be aware, education is really critical, very, very, very critical. It's important to be informed. It's important to be wise as a leader. A business manager, on the other hand, won't do any of this. They're just going to wait till lockdown's over so they can go back to running and managing their business the way it was before. But when you start operating out of a space and you start just exploring this idea of adaptivity, you recognize that it's not just a skill, it's a capability. And it's a capability that comes with this inevitable connection with being far more aware than you ever were before. You know, Martin Luther King, you can't give an I had a dream speech without knowing the stuff that man knew. The people who he was speaking to knew some of what he was aware of. But for him to bring so much passion and to be able to do what we call visioning, most people are taught to have a vision. They're not taught to do what's called visioning. Visioning is a doing word. It is pointless to have a vision and do nothing with it. It is even more pointless to have a vision, to know what it is, and to inspire no one with it. But how do we have that? How do we create that experience where you are so fully engaged with what you want to create to lead? I'm not talking about business management here. Let me really, really clear, because they are two different frames. They are two different capabilities. They operate on almost two different worlds. However, because we're in a distributed leadership space, they are highly interdependent. So you can't manage a successful business without having some leadership skills. And you can't be a great leader without having some management skills. So it kind of blows the lid on this whole, well, I'm going to be this or I'm going to be that. No, you can't just be this or that. You got to have some from here and some from here. You've got to appreciate the contrast. You've got to appreciate the polarity, because the polarity is where growth and emergence happens. To Martin Luther King, you can't have that sense of high engagement and be able to do what's called visioning when you're not informed. So you got to get informed as to the stakeholders, as to the ideas that is shaping your business moving forward, to the ideology that is moving the economy forward. We've come out of we've been operating out of, you know, a high capitalist economy, which is from the Industrial Revolution, which still includes all of these hues of patriarchal structures, very controlling structures, which has prevented high levels of inclusivity and diversity. To ignore that right now in this space is to not acknowledge the world in which, or the economy in which, or the ideology in which business is based upon. So people who are operating businesses, who are solopreneurs, who are micro businesses, who are small businesses, they're completely, they are the antithesis to what capitalism was designed for. It's just freaking brilliant. It's brilliant, because what they have done is not done mass production. What they have done is they've taken the aspects of capitalist economies that they really enjoy, that they resonate with. And now what I think is going to be very interesting to notice and just to observe, and all of us here are going to do this, we're all going to sense make it now. We're all going to sense make what's going on. But it's going to be interesting to see how these businesses evolve. Because complexity theory is about emergence. You know, when you've got these polarities, the paradox of polarities causes us to think that polarities exist because it's contrast. Well, the contrast is the beauty, because when you have contrast, you create and you create new emergent ideas. You generate newness. So what comes out of this is going to be very, very, very interesting to watch. I think a couple of things that will potentially come from it, or that I'm hoping will come from it, is for micro businesses and small businesses. I'm really hoping that they'll start to implement business models that integrates e-commerce a lot better than what they ever did before. I hope that, you know, consultants, practitioners, coaches, trainers, I hope that they will adapt, and they'll start to include into their business model far more activities like what we're doing now. Why do you need to go out to have a meeting, or to do a coaching session, or to go and run a small group workshop? Why do you have to be there face to face? No one says you had to do that or have to do that. Well, now we've had to have the experience where everybody is on lockdown. You can't choose whether or not you're going to do it face to face or you're going to do it from home. You got to do it from home. So it's forcing us to acknowledge that there are systems available that have always been available, that you simply deleted from your view of how business should be run. And now you're getting to embrace, and at least, well, maybe not embrace, you're getting to experience it. Like for many people, they're starting to go, oh, I kind of like this. I like this idea of doing business like this. What is possible for me growing my business out of this space? What is possible for me leveraging? What other businesses are possible? You know, it's a lot of what I think about a lot of this stuff. I think a lot about emerging leaders. Like one of my passion area, my area of interest is predominantly on emerging leaders, because I worry about our emerging leaders, because they're not being set up for success. They are not being taken care of. Many businesses, many organizations, they do not have succession plans for their emerging leaders. There is an emerging leaders crisis. There has been an emerging leaders crisis for decades now, but people have put their head in the sand for it. Solo operators are emerging leaders. You are all emerging leaders. So it's really critical that you start to develop the skills and the capabilities to actually be ahead of the game, to be far more attuned to what is and what isn't, and what is impacting you and what could potentially impact you as it comes down the line. I think I'll take a breath.
That was I don't know about anybody else here, but I've got this brain popcorn going on. My brain's just exploding with all of the knowledge and the wisdom nuggets that you've been sharing. So I guess there's one question obviously from Lauren in there that she'd like to know a little bit more about journey mapping. I don't know if you saw that. I certainly would too. So whether you want to go into that more, or please share, guys, any nuggets of wisdom, learnings that you're having so far into the box, it'd be great.
Absolutely. I'm noticing Denise's comment, virtual graphic. Oh boy, as clients have been having, I get it. I imagine there's a lot of backdoor beauty salons being opened up right now as well. In South Africa, which is where my family's from, they had what's called shebeens, and shebeens were emerged out of the apartheid era for coloured people and black people, because the coloured people, which is, people with my skin colour, my ancestors were never allowed to go into restaurants. So they've always been social distance from restaurants, really, but they were never allowed into restaurants. They weren't allowed into pubs. They weren't allowed to use drinking water fountains and so forth. And so these backdoor pubs were started in the houses of people in what we call shanty towns. So shanty towns, if you've ever seen documentaries about South Africa, particularly in Johannesburg, places like Soweto and so forth, there's just this massive land mass, and it's just these tin houses. They're like matchbox houses, and they've created their own ecosystem, their own cities in these shanty towns. So shebeens were started where people would go, and because they weren't allowed into these to the areas where white people were allowed into, they would go into these shebeens, and that's where they would drink, and they would have their alcohol, and they'd meet their friends, because they also weren't allowed out past a certain time of night. There was curfews for coloured people and for black people as well, and so you had to be at home at certain times. And so I was saying to my husband the other day, I said, oh boy, those shebeens in Cape Town are going to be booming right now, and I would be very, very, very surprised if there weren't some shebeens started up in here in Australia too, with people needing to get out and go and hang out with their friends, doing things behind closed doors. So it's going to be very interesting. So the journey mapping is a very beautiful process, and I think I'll share it on the group for everyone tomorrow, if that's okay, but I'll give you a highlight of it. Journey mapping is, imagine you're playing a game that you know so well, right? So let's pretend Connect 4. We all know how to play Connect 4. So the purpose of journey mapping is to gain a deep understanding about the experience had by, it could be in this case, let's say you're creating a new business model, a new product. What is the experience that the customer is going to have, right? So in journey mapping, what we would do is we would say, okay, so let's take the game Connect 4, for example. I want to know how we can improve Connect 4 from the start of the experience. So I'm going to get a focus group together, and we're going to start at the very beginning of their journey, and we are going to calibrate their experience at every step of the journey to post playing it. So I want to know, what is it like when they receive the product, or pick the product up off the store shelf? What does it feel like? Do they like the way it feels? Is it too big? Is it too small? Is it too slippery? Is it too coarse? What is it like when they're carrying it out of the shop? Is it clunky? Is it rattling around too much? Is it too noisy for them? How do they open it? Is it too difficult to open? This is when this will highlight to you about your packaging, right? Then what about the game? What if it's about, really, is this the best way we can play the game? Is there a different way we can play the game? The idea of normal chess as opposed to 4D chess. 4D chess came about because of journey mapping. The way in which we play the game changes when we journey map. So the way in which you can use journey mapping, and if you Google it, you'll find some information on journey mapping. It's predominantly used for customer service experiences, but where it could be helpful and relevant for you all is in new products you potentially want to create, or improving the products you want to create. The last 2 weeks alone, my team and I have just been journey mapping all of my programs, all of my products that I have in my coaching business, because I create a lot of short courses, right? So at least once a year, I'll create a new course. So we're going back and we're just journey mapping. How do they get onto it? What is their experience? What are they seeing? What are they liking? What are they not liking? What are they really wanting from us? Have we missed the mark on something? Is there something else that we should have been doing? So for in my business, in my coaching business, because I've got multiple businesses, in my coaching business, because one of my key products is short courses, I've gone, why have I never set up an e-commerce store on my website? What was I not thinking to have done that? And then we got to talking, we went, well, why don't you have a Facebook shop, Ilse? And I went, we should do that. Why have we missed the mark on that? So again, it's that process of going, as I was saying to everyone before, where are the leaks? Where is the nodes in your system that's been out of whack, that hasn't lined up? So you're going to find aspects, areas in your business where when you do journey mapping, you'll see the system and where there's blockages in your system or holes in your system, and you're also going to emerge. Remember the capability of emergent ideas. When you do this, you're going to find new ways in which you can actually become more innovative, because the process of journey mapping is an innovation design thinking strategy. It will create some incredible opportunities in your business if you become adaptive. People who are highly rigid and who are suffering from the dysfunction of lack of adaptivity, they're going to really struggle. Remember what I was saying before? I don't know if you guys heard me say it, but I said we're on the precipice of quantum computing and a quantum financial system. You got to be ready. So get your house in order. Get your house in order is what I'm saying. I'm just having a look at these questions. Yeah, people with too many rules, they will struggle. Really well said. Amanda's just said, currently going through this process with her day job in the youth homelessness to ensure they're supported during times of isolation. Yeah, that is wonderful. There's a lot of institutions and organisations are doing some really incredible initiatives to ensure that their consumers and all stakeholders are really well done, really taken care of. I'm doing my postgraduate degree with Murdoch University, which is where I did my undergraduate degree, and they have just been absolutely phenomenal in their support for students. If not every day, I'm getting an email just asking what I need, what could be supportive. Every 3 weeks, I have a meeting with my professors to go over my research that I'm doing. It's just absolutely phenomenal. So there are some institutions that's doing really great. There are some that are tanking, and they're not looking for ways to improve it. But That is the beauty of complexity theory, is within the space of complexity of significant change, those who adapt will thrive. Those who remain in the dysfunctions of non-adaptivity, they will fall behind. And this is what has happened for thousands and thousands and thousands of years on this planet. It is the theory, if we chunk up and go to a more macro level, it's the theory of evolution. Those who survive evolved. We adapted. So adapt or you won't survive. There's a lot of great opportunities for people right now. A lot of great opportunities. As I said as well, many business opportunities as well. Just absolute lot of really, really, really great opportunities out there. I'm seeing a lot of VAKD. Now let's have a quick look here. I don't know what that is in reference to. So if someone can, whoever posed the question about VAKD, if you ask it in a different way, I can answer it. Son's boarding school's not opening back up, so his distance ed here, yet all the local Jabiru school is supporting its borders. It's great. Yeah, I think it's taken them a little while, and that's okay. It becomes as a shock, like the emotional response when you have a crisis moment. For some people, it's to go into shock. So we do the fight or flight. Some people have experienced the crisis moment, and they're in action. It's just our worldview. It's how we've been conditioned. It's how we're wired. However, what happens with, if you look at what's called the Edwin Bell curve, right? The Edwin Bell curve looks at this idea of the way in which we adapt to changes going on around us. So it's another framework you can use to experience this. Some people are what they call laggards. They take really long. They probably won't ever adapt to it. They'll just stay in that old place. They just want business to go back to normal. For goodness sakes, I will not touch technology. I will not be part of it. This is how I do business, and that's just the way it is. I just want the social distancing to be over. Laggards. On the other end of the spectrum, there's 4 aspects to this. You've got the guys, people who are the evolutionists. They are ahead of the game. They are fast to the uptake. They were sense making at such a high level that they were seeing it come down the pipeline, because they were tapped in and tuned into all of the macro and meso and micro aspects that causes their business to experience it the way in which they do. The worldviews are different. And then on the other 2 spectrums, you've got, the early adopters, and you've got the mainstream. They'll kind of wait to see, what are the people who are the evolutionists, the innovators doing? And then if they see it's safe, they'll follow suit. So there's a timeline that occurs. Some people are super fast to do it. Some people take a little bit slower, and that's okay. And some people just won't ever will. It's a convergence of the sharing of worldviews, which is why, the whole idea of, we're in this together, and, people sharing the experience. It's not just about be here with me on a face-to-face call. It's the sharing of ideas. It's that unity aspect of the values and the worldview starting to converge to something that's a little bit more holistic and ecological. So there's different layers that, which depending on how much you want to assimilate and integrate, when you look at these contrasts and these polarities, will determine the way in which you adapt or not to this experience. So Jeanette's just relating VAKD to journey mapping. Yeah, you absolutely can do. Absolutely can do. So it's, the senses, but it's also the process, and it's also innovating the entire game. Why does it have to be played Connect 4 the way Connect 4 is played? Is there a different way we could do it? As I said, if you take the example of chess, what would 4D Connect 4 look like? There's opportunities available right now. There is different levels of thinking that you can tap into that you haven't yet done before, and that's the idea around adaptivity. It's acknowledging and experiencing and embracing this idea of seeming contrasts of polarities, these opposing ideas which you think are conflicting with each other. But the purpose of polarity is to provide integration. That's the purpose of polarity. That's why we have relationships with people who are so totally different to us, because we're attracted to polarity. And the way in which we merge and integrate that is just so critical, not only to our personal growth, but in business, it's the way in which we will then develop as leaders. So I'm going to pause there. I think I have shared stacks this evening. I hope it was, I'm seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, stacks, loads and heaps. I mean, I just like to thank you so much, Ilse, for being here with us tonight and sharing all these nuggets of wisdom. I'm sure everyone's brain popping like I am. Lots of notes here to collate and make more sense of as we go through this. And I'll send everyone a copy of the recording as well, because I'm sure listening to this a couple of times will help it assimilate and go through things. So thank you so much. I mean, anyone else, feel free to come off mute, guys, if you want to say anything, or raise your hand, and we'll try and take a selfie of some description that I can post up into the group.
Yeah, if you do want to say something, maybe raise your hand. Otherwise, we might have masses of conversation happening all at once. I can handle complexity, but not that much. That's awesome. So thank you. You're welcome. Rocking the house. Thank you. Thank you for being here and being absolutely incredible. That's awesome. So Amanda said she'd like to thank everybody from SA hanging out with the WA team. See, whoever thought that region-based Coach and Connect would now be National Coach and Connect? These are the kinds of references that proves that within crisis and complexity we emerge. There is something fresh that always emerges if we are looking for it, if we're creating and predicting our own future. We got Lauren from Tassie, Denise from Northern Territory. Brilliant. Love it. This is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. Really
so
good.
Fiona, I'll let you close, because it looks like we're all good.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much, guys, for all being here. And like I said, I'll send out an email tomorrow with we don't have any obviously PowerPoint presentations, which is our normal form, things like that, when we're doing things live.
Was I supposed to have a PowerPoint presentation?
Not at all. This has been absolutely perfect. Perfect. We didn't have one last month with Dave. It was all sort of just very organic and everything like that. So I think these are the best nights, because people get a chance to ask questions, to interact, and to make it more meaningful to you and your experience and what you're going through with your business. So I think it's been perfect, exactly as it's meant to be. So thank you for that. But I will send out a copy of the recording, like I say, because I think there's some valuable things in there that we can re-watch and learn and dig deeper into. And then feel free after that, guys, if you have any questions or queries, put them into the ICG group. And Ilse and I will do. So thanks very much for being here. Hope you've enjoyed the evening, and we'll hopefully see you again next month.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye, guys.
See ya.